All right. Welcome everyone to the debrief. So this is a session to go over the solution validation that is being done in the editor group. In this session, we're going to be talking about two solution validations. One is we'll start off with like the web IDE. So there's this issue around um, removing one of the tabs in the web IDE. And the other thing that we're going to talk about is validating the editing experience for typing. And if you have any comments or feedback about the session itself, there is this debrief issue for anyone on the call or something like that. The link to it is in the meeting description. Yeah, just leave any feedback that you have there. So, so going into this with, let me see if I can find the initial thing. So with the web IDE, currently there's three tabs. So one about files, review, and like commit. And Dennis came up with this brought up this idea of why don't we combine the tabs into one, or essentially like removing one. At the time that he proposed this 3 months ago, I had no clue what he was talking about. Like, I did not know anything about the web IDE and did not know the historical context of this pattern where if you use Visual Studio Code, you may understand it, but looking at other research and discussions with Mike Nichols, who was the previous designer on in the editor team, um, yeah, not many people understood this flow of having code review and commit. So and there's this work here around potentially combining them, but also there is this other idea of potentially doing away with the tabs completely and going to like a file list. So all of this stuff was kind of new to me, and I was kind of approaching this solution validation to understand like what needs to be seen and like what's the current perception of what's being seen right now. So if we go into the solution validation for this, kind of structured the test to take a look at, do we need a navigation tree? So kind of with the hypothesis that like, yes, having a navigation tree is useful for helping people understand the structure and locations of files in the repository. um, the other thing that I was thinking about seeing this kind of layout was the files system, the files listed here don't have any hierarchy to them. um, so one of the ideas I had was potentially showing a path, showing the path, kind of like how in different file systems they would have like grayed out or like in lighter text to show in the short path, and then if you hover over it you can see it. And then looking at some of this, looking at the merge requests in the web IDE, there's a lot of icons that pop up. So I wasn't like if we move forward with that and thinking about cleaning up the UI, like if the icons need to stay or if there's better ways to do this. And the last hypothesis was allowing users to view changes. So this is taking this idea of pulling out the changes out in its own kind of list and like showing it. So this is one execution. The execution that I went with was with a tab layout. So this is combining both kind of ideas where we have like a changes and a file tree list. So and then changes lives kind of like as a tab, and it would potentially only appear if there's changes to the merge request. There's probably some holes in this, but The logic for it would be similar to what Dennis proposed up in here. So that was what I was looking at from a high level. And the outcomes of this test, of this solution validation around the tabs was having the change lists with some kind of hierarchy. So showing like the partial path would be helpful for people when they're scanning the changes. So if I look at, so this is what I was using as my basis of needing open web IDE. So I have this merge request with a few changes on it, and I would ask people how many files are part of the merge request. So in this kind of like approach, you have to actually count all of these individual like numbers. There's actually nothing on the screen that I know of that would tell you what files are that are ready to review, or part of the merge request. So that was the question that I had there. And if you did make any changes to say this one, let me just make that, and I'll change something at the root. So if I change that to like 3 or something, so those are 2 change files. We don't really show like the nested, like the path of it, but we show it in the tooltip. So this was just an exploration to see if something like this would be useful. And then the other thing is, if you want me to slow down or anything, let me know. I'm just going. So yeah, this is probably a clearer way. So this is what we kind of have right now. If you hover, you see the path. And these were like some of the other explorations between, do we show the tree all the time? Do we show the path on the side like this? Because there is no hovering in this kind of like image check, the only thing that people could see is this. So they preferred option C. Option B is clean, but some people said that like if you have a really nested directory, it can get really unwieldy. So something like this would be better for scannability. Yeah. So that's that part there. So, and then the second part was thinking about the reducing of the tabs. So landing on a merge request, I think if we just remove the like reveal tabs, I think that's fine. Like that doesn't really change much, because if someone knows this, is there any difference between these two views from the tree or the content, really? Or there's nothing, right? It's like, to me it feels like it's the same thing with like one or two like some subtle changes, but like that's why we were thinking of combining them anyways in Dennis's original.
What was your question again about the review tab?
Is it basically the same as the files tab, the edit tab? Because besides for some extra information about the merge request itself.
So in the context of a merge request is where it'll be one of the most significant differences, because you have the ability to look at a file and see how is it changed from the head of the merge request, or no, actually, what's the merge request difference? Which you can't do from the regular view, and like that's just baked into that view.
Yes.
So
on the
apart
screen,
from
right?
just showing,
Yeah.
what were you saying?
I know. I was just saying that, like on the screen right now, I found the part that you're talking about that has a drop down that allows you to check the current merge request or reviewing changes since the last commit. So this kind of breakdown.
Right, and it's by default. You're looking at merge requests when you open from a merge request. Like the expected workflow of when they open from a merge request is we open up all the merge request changes and you see the same diff that you're seeing in the merge request view. But there's some significant similarities between the two views. That's the one significant nuance that in previous attempts to try to simplify this, because there is a lot of redundancy, that's the one nuance we haven't been able to figure out, where does that live. Yep.
Cool. So I think that's fair. And I think from this solution validation of looking at the tabs and understanding the problem better, and looking at the feedback of some of the proposed changes of isolating the changes list as a way of potentially showing that in context with the file tree itself could be like a way of moving forward. So yeah, the next steps for this kind of for this for the initial proposal around combining the reveal and commit tabs is to like go ahead with it. But I think the thing that I would want to do is take a look at how we combine them, like what does that look like in the context of not only combining this but potentially moving forward with like one of the designs here. Either we isolate it in two separate lists, or we do it in a tabs, or this is kind of like the next direction of it. So there's probably an iterative sequencing that we could do here to simplify the views. Background on this was that, like, when I was looking at this issue initially, it was suggested to me whether it makes sense to consolidate the tabs or just make the big jump to the two lists kind of approach. So this is probably the underlining thinking that I have in my head right now when I was running this solution validation, that I wanted to understand the possible paths that we could take and like what we would give up, and for me to understand that in the context of the web IDE, because yeah, haven't really done too much, and this is the first thing that I've done in the web IDE. So yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments about what you've seen, or do you want any more details about what was done? If you,
The one
yeah.
question I had, when you were showing the three options for the file tree, to either to have it nested or to show the path on the side,
Yeah.
and you said most people preferred showing the path like after it, that would have problems if it's a long path too.
Yeah.
Like, would there be this long horizontal scroll?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So this is interesting because, like, our current option A, you can see the path when you hover over it. It's not very, like, it's hard to view it using the keyboard and all that stuff. So there's problems with it. Like you said, there's problems with option C with space. Like, you can only truncate so much, even if you try to like truncate the middle part and top part. Yes. So this change, I think, would be like something that would need further exploration and need for it needs some further investigation. It's not like impossible to do. There's other things that we haven't considered about, the column width, available width, to look at things. So yes, yeah, okay. Simple thing, yes,
It's,
Chad, you're right. There's issues with with showing things like that.
is this on the commit tab?
So this on the screen right now, Paul, is I'm showing a screenshot of what I proposed, like layouts of how the file tree could look like. Or like the change list itself could look like.
Like right before I commit and I see the files that I've changed, what those would look like. Is that right?
Yeah. So right now it's a alphabetical list, and then you
right.
can hover over it.
And it's just a file name. It's not even the full path. And
correct.
So we've encountered very similar, if not the same, UX problem with the merge request diff file tree. And that actually has I don't know if it's a setting on the database or whatever, but the user can actually change if they want to see it with the list with the grayed out file paths like you're talking about, or if they want to see it in the nested tree format. That functionality and that component behavior is kind of already all there, as well as that UX pattern. And one of the things they did for the problem that that Chad's bringing up is if you do have a really long file path and you're not doing the nested folder thing, they truncate in the middle as opposed to like at the end. So they'll do the ellipsis in a smart place in the middle, which is, I think, similar to what VS Code does.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, it makes sense to use that same paradigm in UX that we do for the merge requests.
Yep. Hey, Chad, do you know how to navigate to that view in this view?
So you have to have, this is an MR.
Yep.
I'm gonna unfortunately have to hop off. See everybody.
Yeah, no problem.
So you're seeing it on the left here, like the styles directory. But for example, if you changed a file that was much more deeply nested than styles, I think that's where you would see it.
Okay. All right. Cool. I'll check that out on my own time. Cool. Now, we'll jump into the editing experience. So, yeah, with the editing experience, what we're looking at here was using TipTap and which variation of TipTap do we want to go forward with, and what kind of experience do we want to provide people. So some of the things that popped up in the past was perhaps using a floating menu to allow people to insert blocks into the editor, kind of like how you would do in Notion. And then one idea that I had was like, if you highlight something, then you get like tool and like a pop-up menu on top of the words to like look at to do something with it, like bold it or edit it. So the two thanks to Enrique for suggesting to use Code Sandbox to kind of do this. It was useful. It was easy to use, but yeah. So this was like the first kind of scenario. I kind of forced it to not show the toolbar, but some of the tasks was to like say, okay, highlight this stuff here. This phrase here, I wanted people to use block quotes. So not many people got understood what was block quotes, and a lot of people went for this execution of using the code. But like we wanted people to use this, and this is not the same icon that's being used for quotes at the moment. This is something that was explored in the UX channel about potentially redoing that. Um, but yeah, this was a good experience because when people had to insert a block in like a heading or a table, they kind of got this right away. And yeah, they went, cool, I can add something here. People who were proficient in Markdown could type directly, and typing Markdown was like, people did it subconsciously. For example, like a numbered list, like doing something like that. That's actually like the Markdown shortcuts. But yeah, to users, they weren't even thinking like that. So that was a really interesting point. Tables are always interesting. I didn't want to deep dive on the solution validation to like understand what's the best way to do tables. Like, if you highlight this, what kind of command should pop up at the top. I kind of kept it out of the scope because we'll tackle that when we tackle tables, and whatever TipTap provides, it feels like it was sufficient. There's like, we'll probably like take away functionalities of like merging cells and all that stuff, because maybe that's not supported by uh, GitLab flavor Markdown. But yeah, this was the first task that people had to do. They had to use this interface, which is like a pseudo issue, and do some stuff. And then the second one had the toolbar at the top. So if you highlight over something here, there's no pop-up menu. And people love this experience more because they could see all the options available to them at the beginning. Um, Even with that fact, when they had to go in and add a H2, when you have like this scenario where like there's a opportunity to insert like a block element, people would go for this over the toolbar. And I suspect that's just because it's closer. Um, so yeah, so what I learned, the only downside of this is there's something to be aware of when we implement this is scrolling. So if it's this toolbar should always be visible for people typing, because yeah, they got kind of annoyed if they would have to scroll up to see it. But I think that's something that we probably already do with our current comment boxes and things like that. Yeah. Any, let's see. Let me just go through kind of the structured. So inserting a block for inserting elements, yes. People would gravitate towards the floating menu to enter it, even if there's a toolbar there. So that was a winner. The pop-up menu, this menu here pissed off people, because if I wanted to change this H2 to H1, but if you don't provide the option, yeah, that's a bad experience. That's something that we'll probably like get right when we present this. But when you start going to presenting subsets of the available features, you need to be careful that you don't prevent something that users want to do. Yes. Any questions about this? So actually, before the questions, so in context of the work that's going on, I think that starting off with the toolbar is like a safe bet. It sets us with a nice foundation, and I would say that like adding this floating menu for inserting blocks would be like a next iteration, like to add. But yeah, life could be fine with just the toolbar, but this would be like a nicer experience.
It's really interesting. I will look through and respond in the issue because I know we're almost at time, but this is really helpful context, and I'm particularly interested in how people were annoyed with the formatting hover tooltip and how we can reconcile the desire to have like block editing with no toolbar, but not get in their way with other contextual type of control. So I think definitely some room to keep working. And I agree, the toolbar is safe and nobody's going to argue about it, but we have the opportunity to embrace the block editor in a later iteration and work on making it more obvious. Like I agree, you highlighted the like desire to switch the heading level. So I think trying to think what application I use that does that well. It might be Notion, where like in the gutter there's like a little drop down and you can change the block type to something else. That's not something TipTap has natively, I believe, but it might be something we have to extend to support changing of block level elements separate from formatting selected text, which is probably why that doesn't show up when you select text, because really the intent is like, I'm going to bold this span of characters and not necessarily affect the block level.
Yeah, it kind of does. It shows up as like whatever you selected. So if this part is bolded, it does kind of highlight it. Like the styling's not visible here, but it does provide you. So if you have like the H2 selected, so if I change this to an H2 and I jump back to here, it does highlight it as a H2. So that's pretty useful.
So yeah, and if you click H1, will it change that block level without having it selected, just if your cursor's in there? It does, okay.
Yeah.
So that's actually a benefit to the toolbar, and then it shows the status of the block level. So yeah, I think this is interesting. I'll dig deeper into the
feel free
verbatim
to ping,
and we can chat.
Yeah, feel free to ping me anywhere to discuss this in further detail.
So Michael, in terms of how we prioritize what we are going to be working in the coming weeks, would you say that we should like focus more on implementing support for new content types as tables, or implementing this type of user experiences, like implementing the block level toolbar?
So are you saying, do we want to like do funky things with the tables like at this level, or are you talking more about just having table functionality in the wiki?
Just having table functionality, like implementing the basic support with all of the context menu to aid the table.
Can you do tables right now in the wiki?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have a good answer
I'll,
to that because tables
I'll jump in and just throw something out if you want, like just as a straw man to pick apart. I think it's more important to get full support for GitLab flavored Markdown for rendering and editing everything that's available than it is to iterate on the block editor and toolbar experience. I think because the toolbar is accessible and safe and we know people know how to use it, we can get going there. And then after we're done supporting all of the GFM formats, then we can go back and tweak how you edit and where we show those options.
Question.
Yep.
So the paradigm of like you could write raw markdown and then it automatically turns into stuff. I'm just wondering, like if you write invalid markdown and change it, I'm just wondering about the edge cases of like at what point do we try to render that? And so I guess my questions are there other products out there as examples that do this or do this well? Because in my experience with Notion, I know it's really popular, but I I struggled with its editor immediately, and I had a lot of trouble getting it to do what I wanted in a couple of cases. I don't know the exact examples, but
yeah.
when I tried to write raw Markdown or get it to like even insert something, it seemed.
Yeah, I think this one's going to be a really interesting one, because this prototype was actual code. Um, People were just going wild with it. They were like, "Oh, can I do this? Can I do this using like just shortcuts? Can I use this using the toolbar?" So they were trying everything, and there was one participant who reminded me of, yeah, he was saying like, "Yeah, this is really good, but like I like to write my Markdown in Markdown, so I would prefer a separate tab to just write the Markdown straight up and um, toggle a preview." This is where I think the same kind of problem existed when we were looking at the static site editor, that there's a possibility to, I think, push harder now that we understand the problem a lot better since static site editor days, that there's probably some interactions or things that we could like do, perhaps provide the markdown editing view, but also, when you're in preview, that's when this like rich text editor works, but or vice versa. So um yeah, I think the handling the case of like the custom types and like other things that like TipTap doesn't handle out of the box, and where you can have invalid markdown, like what happens, or like unclosed uh elements, like, do you render that, or do you just assume everything's broken?
Or raw
um
HTML, like that's
yeah, exactly.
that's a valid Markdown, and you can put whatever you want there.
Hmm. Like the details kind of thing, where you kind of hide stuff and show stuff. um
Yeah, it's just I'm wondering what edge cases there are, and I'm concerned as in that category. Like I like to be able to write raw Markdown of
mm,
not being able to do that, and whenever I'm not able to, it seems like I always get in this case where I'm trying to make it just put a line or something, and I can't
mm,
make it do.
yeah. And I think that's the differentiator between what we're trying to do and what like Notion and other like not WordPress, but like Medium kind of offer, because that's kind of like very fixed of what you can do. Whereas like we are living in a world of predefined stuff, plus like here's some other stuff that you can do by just typing it out by default. And one potential solution to this is to like offer that functionality through like a tool or a block, like, so you want to enter um, a mermaid diagram, like link to like your mermaid diagram somewhere, or like put your code inside this special block, and then we'll render it for you. So yeah, that could be a way forward, but
That's my instinct too for the use case of writing HTML, which is valid Markdown. But like if you wanted to insert a more elaborate table, or you wanted to add like style tags and stuff inline, it's technically possible, right? I don't know how that would end up rendering in the wiki. I've never tried, but if you wanted to write Markdown, there might be a block that's just like, okay, enter your Markdown. Enter if you wanted to write HTML. Sorry, I'm getting it all confused. If you wanted to render HTML inline, you could click a button similar to how we have a code block, and then you insert your HTML and click, commit effectively, and then we could even render it, and then you could have like a toggle in line with the page where you can view the source of the HTML to edit it, view the rendered preview, etc. Because right now, I believe this that that you're typing right now, Michael, is going to just end up being paragraph tags that look like HTML, right?
yeah.
I think that may. I'm not positive, but I think that may have like custom support, that particular details
Oh, this thing.
query tag.
Yeah.
in GitLab flavor Markdown, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Any other comments or questions about what's going on? Because the whole purpose of this session is to like just ask the questions straight up before I do like a more formal, focused recording of this session.
So I have like one question or so from your guests and interaction with you. Do you think they got the concept of like text being like organized in blocks? Is it like, because we so far with like what you can highlight, you always highlight like text, right? But I think what I'm missing is kind of like we make like block editing, basically a core concept of how this whole thing is designed. Where say like, do you feel like the people understood? Okay, this is like potentially blocks where say this is why you can change like certain types. This is how they organize. This is why you get like this extra bar, because it's like really an extra block or so where you kind of start something.
All right. Good question. Really good question. I think elements like images and tables and things like that come as a block, and that's I don't know if they understood it as explicit blocks, but it's like here's a piece. When you have something like this, like how do we want to treat this? Is this 3 blocks or 1 block? I don't know. Or like maybe we
should be 3 blocks.
Yeah, it should be 3 blocks, but
in other applications there are visual cues to indicate what a block is. Like in Notion, blocks are draggable, and they have a drag handle that indicates, they are like separate entities. So I think that like if the user don't see that visual cue, it's difficult for them to understand block as individual elements.
Yeah, that's what I would be missing now or so, like to have like a separate highlighting. Yeah, pretty much to say, hey, you're hovering over this paragraph and you see it somehow with a small variant with a kind of like highlighted background color, super simple or so, that you start to understand how this whole thing is like organized. And like your table is like one block that you can like potentially move around, but as soon as you're in the block or so, you're kind of in the table. Like this gives you a certain set of tools. This is why shaping the expectations of user by giving them like a good understanding of the concept.
I think actually something I mentioned earlier about the gutter and being able to switch the block type could help there a lot, because like if you hover or have your cursor inside that, we might not need to outline necessarily the boundaries of the block, but if it's clear that like this block selector follows you along in the gutter, that's the context that you're working in right now, we might be able to kind of reinforce that concept and solve 2 problems at once.
So as long as we can handle this use case where if I press delete, I join the blocks, like because WordPress has like with their Gutenberg editor, the early editions where it was just purely blocks, content writers had a tough time understanding that they had to fit their content inside the blocks itself, and it was like it took away from the natural like single page kind of experience of like writing stuff, and it's more like these tables were the blocks. So yeah, something to keep in mind. As long as to the user it feels like a page, whether it's not, and that's something that that we can handle. But
I would say I was just confirming that the TipTap demo does this already. It handles it very well.
Okay. Which demo is that one? Like
the one on just TipTap, scrumpy.io or whatever their demo page is. If you go to the menu bubble example, which is what they call their block editor, and hit enter, start typing a new paragraph, and then delete that separation, it works. Sorry.
Yeah.
Open the drag handle one. I think that one is also like has like the concept of well, it's not that actually that one. In the new website, they have like something that is more resemble of independent blocks. But it's like kind of the idea that like imagine that those separate elements could be like paragraph that you can handle or move around, things like that. But again, as you said before, like that removes the experience of having like a single page and a single document that you're editing.
Down the road, I'd love to test the drag handles. I think it might go a little far in the direction of like building blocks on a page builder and take away from the like I'm writing a document kind of feel. But I could be wrong. I think we should definitely test that.
Cool. Yeah, so we went a bit over time, but I assume, yeah, if you have further questions, feel free to leave a comment inside the individual solution validations or the debrief session issues. So yeah, let me know. And thank you for attending this debrief session.
Thanks for putting this together.
Thank you. Good job, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.